Welcome to the Shameless Podcast, where I help Christian men kill shame, stand strong, and live on mission. I'm your host, Ken Freire, and I'm bringing you real stories, practical insights, and biblical truths that equip you to break free from your sin, shame, and live a life of purpose. Let's step out of the shadows together and into the light of Christ. All right, everybody, welcome back to another great episode. I am so excited about the podcast interviewer I have today, Joe Masek. All right, some things you got to know before we jump into this conversation. Joe has had a deep past. We're going to go through a lot of it about overcoming shame, rediscovering his God-given identity, and he is the founder of the Freedom Group. And Joe's story is going to be extremely moving. He's going to talk about addiction, abuse, just a lot of the things that he went through and how God has redeemed him. So I'm super excited for all of you to know him. So Joe, welcome to the podcast, man. You have an amazing testimony of how God redeemed your life, man. And we're going to go into that. But before we go too deep and too heavy, man, just tell people something fun about you that they should know if they were just starting to get to know you.
Yeah, something fun about me. I've been a DJ since I was a seventh grader. I was homeschooled up until high school. Most people, when they meet me, that's the first thing they think is weird, awkward homeschool kid. So I was homeschooled up until high school. So we used to drive to this co-op with me and a buddy. We had two dreams. One was to be DJs and the other was to start a garage band. So I would say that in my life, the DJ pursuit has worked out a lot better than the garage band. We didn't get much farther than our garage with the garage band we started, but we started both. The DJ stuff was the first LLC I ever started. I started it when I was in 8th grade because we started making money DJing weddings for some of our relatives, and then some of their friends started requesting us because we were cheap. And then I started building that business all the way to the point I think I peaked probably around my junior year. It was actually an amazing part of really rediscovering how much God loves me as his son and sees my heart, which is too long for the question that you're asking, that side of the story. But I had the opportunity to DJ for Red Bull Crashed Ice. So like middle of January, 20 degrees outside, 7th Street down in St. Paul, 15,000 people in a tricked out fire truck that Red Bull had built. And it was the inspiration. Later in my life, I built my own mobile DJ booth that I still own and operate just for fun now. So that's, I guess that's the most fun side of me. And I always get the itch like once a quarter, like I gotta go play some music somewhere. So, and God's given me opportunities to keep doing it.
That's awesome. So how did, typically you don't think homeschooler and DJ. So like, how did that happen? That you like just got hooked into DJing?
Honestly, because of how lame the stuff I would go to was, if I'm being completely honest, like my distinct memories or thoughts about getting into it was like, this can't be this lame. Like we can't have this little fun as Christians when the people out there look like they're having so much fun. We got to be able to raise the bar. So that's honestly like as a 7th, 8th grader, I was just like energetic, boisterous, like trying to find my own way in life, like loved being outgoing and creating experiences for people and frankly being the center of attention. I didn't mind that so much. And so I saw we had this, I don't want to defame him, but his name was DJ Bill. He was just not really good at doing anything much than what you would imagine from a classic homeschool dance. If you picture it, that's what it was. It was like corny line dances, punching the air to an NSYNC song. My experience was like, we got to be able to do better than this. I love hip hop, rap, EDM, energetic music. And really, when I walked away from the Lord, which we'll get into a little bit, like that music and the darker side of that music really had a place in my life. And so as I rediscovered my faith, I wanted to find redeeming music, talking to producers and other people that were making this stuff. And then my favorite kind of music is taking stuff that's out there that has been remixed into not just a clean version in the sense that they don't curse or there's no references in it, but really like amazing music that has a twist that people hear something they're familiar with. One of my favorite remixes, Christian remixes, is Another in the Fire. And
Yeah.
I think it's Billy Dean, I think his name is, but he has this amazing EDM remix to that song. That's just like, that song has so much meaning for my wife and I, especially the season that we're walking through right now. And I turn that on and I just get like, it's inspirational and I get amped up all at once. So anyway, that's sort of the short story. The funny reason why I think I got into it is because we got to be able to do it.
Yeah.
It can't be that lame. Christians can't be that lame. That's what it was.
So my brother, he was a DJ for a while, and
Cool.
he's about 8 years older than me. So when you said his name was the DJ for your dances was DJ Bill, I'm like, yeah, that's not gonna work. Because I just remember DJs always had their own nicknames, and they
Yeah,
came up with stuff. So
yeah,
DJ Bill was
yeah.
not
It's a heck of
fire.
a moniker. Yeah, yeah,
Awesome. Okay, Joe, I think you and I could talk about music all day long. You're gonna have to send me the song because I'm now so curious to listen to the Billy Dean one.
absolutely.
There's a couple other guys that I know that on Instagram that I follow that do remixes, and they do a really great job. I'm sure you probably follow them because that's your
Yeah,
world. But when
yeah,
I find them, I'll send them to you. Okay, let's get into today's topic because we could talk about DJing and music probably for hours. That's a fun passion of mine.
yeah.
But
I love
what
it.
we're going to talk about is your story,
Yep.
right? And when you and I first met, we shared stories, and it was very similar to in a lot of ways. But walk us through your journey at the beginning, your childhood. What happened, and what did God start to, or not God, but the enemy really started to affect your life?
Yeah. So I grew up in a pretty typical Midwestern family, just north of the Twin Cities. Here, grew up in a faithful church community, but so much of my experience when I was young was colored by the fact that I was introduced to sexuality very, very early in my life. 7, 8 years old. There was another person relatively close in age to me, but older than me. So somebody I saw as a big brother, if you will, that started doing what a psychologist would say is child sexual experimentation. But I experienced, frankly, as abuse, like being introduced to things I wasn't comfortable with, that made me feel dirty, that made me feel shameful. And I had no outlet to talk to anybody about that stuff, or didn't feel like I did. My parents weren't
Yeah,
super emotionally expressive. It's one of the three hallmarks that they talk a lot about in people who struggle with sexual addiction is emotionally distant parents. And that's a reality of the world that I grew up in, and not feeling like I had that outlet or older people to go and confide in. And I found right around that same time, my older brother and my uncle built a computer that we had outside of our room. And through LimeWire on that
oh yeah,
computer, I thought I was downloading MP3 files for some of that rap music I talked about earlier that my brother was introducing me to. And one of them was pornography. And from that moment, I got that same rush and that same thrill and that same experience of dirtiness, shame, hide, don't tell anyone, that I had through some of these early sexual experiences with this older guy. And so through all of that, I mean, porn became my everything, right? It was the only thing that I needed to cope with in life. I hated it, but I loved it at the same time. And I mean, so early in my developmental life, 7, 8, 9 years old, it became deeply rooted. It's the place that I went for emotional escape. So I'd seek it out as frequently as I could. I mean, I wasn't good at hiding, so I'd get caught, and then
yeah,
what am I? Oh no, that wasn't me. I didn't do that. That was somebody else. Forget to delete the files on the computer, or something was still pulled up, or whatever. And I'd always be able to escape somehow, and so it never really got like truly pinned on me all the way throughout my life. And so that really created a foundation for that, colored all of my experience, colored a lot of I think what early on I was experiencing this dislike or distaste for myself, feeling dirty, feeling that sense of worthlessness, feeling deep shame, like something was wrong with me, which is not uncommon for somebody who's been abused or who has
yeah.
had that happen to them. And in addition to that, shortly after, I mean, it was a few years, probably 5, 6 years after that time, I started to act out with others, particularly one sibling that was younger than me, that really became the thing I was most deeply shameful for, right? I mean, again, a psychologist would call this child sexual experimentation. There was a level of innocence to it, that I was below, to some degree, the age of reason or whatever. that I was just acting out what had been done to me. But I realized that I was perpetrating the same thing, especially later on in life, the same kind of, I don't want to say force because it wasn't forceful, but the same kind of pressure to be able to engage that activity with somebody who was innocent. And so
Yeah.
I bury that stuff deep within me. You know, it's one thing to have experienced pornography that I didn't feel like I had permission to talk to others, to have had these experiences with other people, or particularly this other guy outside of me, and not be able to talk to anybody. But this was the stuff that I was deeply wrong for, even if it is, again, some level of innocence in the activity itself that adults would understand if I had gone to a therapist, that they could have helped me work through the weight of all of that. But I didn't have any of that. And so I buried that stuff to the point where, honestly, until young adulthood, I had forgotten most of it because of how deeply I buried some of those core memories.
Yeah. Well, first, Joe, for those who are listening, that is some deep stuff. And thank you for sharing that, right? Because you just communicated, and correct me if I'm wrong, you went from abuse. So someone sinned against you and they took your innocence, and then you got addicted to pornography, and then you started to abusing others,
Yep.
right? And again, you were still trying to figure out what's going on, and you were just doing what you learned from others. You're like, this must be it's crazy. And you tell me if I'm right or wrong here. Like, you're like, in some ways, this is all you kind of knew, but deep down inside, your conscience was telling you this is wrong.
Yeah.
Is that kind of how you were feeling?
Yeah, certainly with all of it. To be honest, it was just, I mean, I think at that age, most of my experience was confusion and
Yeah.
disassociation. If I'm being totally honest, is I don't think I put a lot of it together. I don't think
Hmm.
I could have articulated it 10% of what I just articulated to you of what was going on, what was happening to me, because I didn't even really understand what I was doing or what was, it felt so out of control. It felt so not me. And on both sides, both when it was being done to me, when I was participating in something like pornography, or when I was pressuring somebody else to do something or trying to elicit that experience from somebody else, that it just was all like I was propelled into it and searching and trying to find that high or that same pleasure, that same fulfillment again. Really, it did what I experienced for so many years after, is it just colored all of my life as gray and agitated and emotionally unwell, unless I was getting that peak experience. So I would answer your question by just simply saying that most of my experience is frankly just simply confusion and disassociation. And I also want to add, like, I shared that, and my heart is to share that for two reasons. Is because one, a counselor in college, when I started to finally get help, told me that somewhere around 55 to 60% of young people in America today will experience childhood sexual experimentation. So I know I'm not
Yeah.
alone, and people have so much shame. I mean, I've met hundreds of people doing this work for even just a few years. I mean, it's been over 10 years now, but yeah, I want people to know that they're not alone in that, because I think many people say, oh, yeah, I struggle with porn. It's easier and easier to say. I think that's good and healthy, and that we're lowering the barrier on shame to be able to admit that now. I think there's a lot of guys that still have a lot of
Yeah.
resistance around that. But going to those deep places, like I just went to, I also say it for the reason that I want to be understood first and foremost, and it's part of a therapy process for myself to be able to put it out there and say, this is me, this is what I've walked through, this is who I am. And the redemption that God has worked in my life has been so fulfilling as a result of being able to experience that kind of hell as a young man early in my life. And for people to know that they're not alone in that experience of feeling not just like someone abused me, which again, I think the Me Too movement or other things have made it easier to be like, I have been perpetrated against,
Yeah.
but to acknowledge the shame, which again, nobody was telling me I should bury that stuff and forget those memories. I just did it, which to your point, I just buried that stuff in me because I had such deep shame that I had to completely disassociate from its existence, versus just came up like, oh, that memory flashed across my mind. I feel bad about that. Let me go medicate. It's like that stuff. I didn't even allow that stuff for a very long time to come up. And I just want people to know that you're not alone in that. I see you. I know what it feels like. And especially if you've not done the work to get beyond that, like, you can do it. So, I mean, certainly it started as a free gift from God in my life to be able to introduce me to the things that I needed to be able to help me work that stuff out. But it's never too late. It's never too late to start that process.
100%, man. And I love how you were just talking about it, because most people that I've talked to, they feel like they're completely alone and they're isolated. And that's what shame does, right? It isolates you to think you're the only one who has this struggle. And if you were to share this, one, they're going to reject you. And two, you're going to be like exiled. And then three, God is going to hate you forever. But the reality is, it's the complete opposite, right? When you share this, especially within a gospel, God centered community, right? You're going to see the love of God, and you're going to see people kind of come to you and be like, thank you for sharing it. And you're right, man. Like, when I think about the statistics, I remember people would say like 1 in every 3
Yeah.
women would be sexually abused and 1 in every 4 guys would be sexually abused. And I was like, when you do the math, I'm like, that's like 50%. I'm like, that's like half of the room. So I remember sharing my story, and I would get in a group of people, it's 50 to 100 people. And I would say something like 1 in every 3 and 1 in every 4 of you statistically, and this was back in like 2010,
Right.
right, has been abused. So I know I'm talking to at least half of you right now, but none of you are going to say it. None of you are going to raise your hand. So I'm not even going to bother asking you.
Right. Right.
I'm just going to go with that assumption. And time again, man, I would have people at the end when I'm done talking and sharing my testimony, they would just come up to me just in tears because they're like, you're the first person, and especially a guy, who vocalized their pain and their emotions, and then the hope. They saw the hope and the joy. They're like, how are you so joyful? Because they're like, I do not have what you have. And they've been going to church for years. They've been a believer for years, and they're like, I need help. And it's beautiful to see that. So, Joe, for you, man, how then? Well, first, let's talk about the depth of the shame, right? Because you talked about it, especially when you think about the disassociation that you had, all of a sudden you grow up. And at what point does it just kick in and you realize, oh my gosh, look at all the things that have happened to me and look at all the things that I've done to others?
Yeah, again, like I said, Ken, for so long I didn't stop long enough to think about it.
Hmm.
Most of my life was geared towards keep numbing or keep moving
Yeah.
in order to not have it to face it. And I developed what was softly diagnosed at one point by a psychologist as trauma-induced ADD, because I think I had spent so long. I mean, I think I had certain proclivities personality-wise to that,
Yeah.
but there was so much energy in my life geared towards escape, 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 move, 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 that I just became wired like that. And so I went for a very long time not facing it, learning, frankly, how to not face it.
Yeah.
That
You coped
became,
with it in different areas, in different ways.
yeah, yeah. Whether it be just being with people all the time. My parents used to joke that the front door was revolving. They stopped locking the front door because buddies of mine would be knocking on the door like all day, every day, and stuff like just filling my life with stuff, with people, with buying stuff, with eating, and then with pornography. And that really colored my experience all the way through high school. And how I was doing emotionally, the weight of my life ebbed and flowed. I mean, it wasn't all dark. I wouldn't say I was
Yeah.
deeply depressed throughout all high school or out all middle school. It was far more the roller coaster of high highs and low lows, going in and out of those experiences, and just keep moving, just keep numbing, being really how I went about my stuff. So I didn't really acknowledge it at any point until I got to college. When I went to college, I remember making a conscious choice. If I had lived a very two-faced life at high school, I never really, largely, I think, because of all of this stuff
Yeah.
and being homeschooled up until then, I had no idea how to fit into social peer groups. And so I went to high school, and immediately, even though I went to a private Christian high school, that whole system became inaccessible to me. So I spent 4 years, I mean, oftentimes going entire days where I didn't say a word, even though my personality is pretty outgoing, pretty comfortable, pretty able to make relationships and have conversations with people. So that was excruciating. And I just felt such a shell of myself at high school. and I never learned how to break out of that. And then I go to my
Mm.
youth group, and then it was like once a week, it was like let loose time. And I was the class clown, boisterous, loud, outgoing, talking to everybody there, making a fool of myself, just trying to fill my bucket of all of the social engagement I wasn't getting, but my 9 to 5, if you will, in high school. And so those two experiences, and I really chased godlessness in high school and was whoever anybody wanted me to be.
Yeah.
And so I had sexual relationships with girls and was acting out and trying to get into the party scene and trying to have fun and do whatever. And there really was no moral code over here, with limits of being a good little Christian boy. And then over here there was be a good person, do everything, be really faithful, be involved on the core team, be the guy, right? And so when I got to college, it was like, I don't want any of that. I just want to be me. And so I threw myself into the party culture because I was a DJ. I knew how to have energy and fun and experience life through that. My brother was a senior in college at that point. He had a house, so I was the cool freshman kid who knew where to go to have a party. And so I just threw myself into that lifestyle. And by the grace of God, I only lasted about 8 months before I hit my personal rock bottom. I gave my virginity away, the one thing a good little Christian boy is supposed to hang on to. And I woke up the next day, and it was one of 3 times in my life that I feel like I've heard an audible voice to me. And he said, "Is this the life that you want?" And it wasn't a voice of
Mm.
condemnation or shame or like, "What the hell's wrong with you? How could you do this to me? Look at everything I've given you in your life, and you threw it all away. Like, you're the prodigal son." Like, no, he didn't pile on me in that way. He says, "Is this what you want? Because you can have it. Like, you can go have it." And I just knew in that moment, it's like, that's not what I want. I want you, but I don't know how to get you. So I went to the church down the street, and I got on my knees and cried out to a God I barely knew for a life I didn't know I could have, and went out the next weekend and did it all again. And then I went back there and I was like, no, God, I'm actually serious. Like, I really need help. And it was the first time in my life that next month and a half that I started to meet men who weren't walking in crippling shame, that were
Mm.
walked like they knew who they were, that seemed comfortable in their own skin, that were normal, average, likable, attractive dudes that I wanted to be like. But more than all of that, they loved Jesus and were following him with all of their life. And I was like, whatever you have, I want that. So to answer your original question, as I circle the water of both the questions that you wanted me to go down, is my experience up until that point was disassociation because of the deep shame, and then having to face the deep shame because this spiral life early in college was creating in me, was so unsustainable to continue to exist, that I eventually fell flat on my face, sometimes literally, like just faced with how
Oh
broken
yeah.
and how numb I had become. And really, if I'm being totally honest, that's when I started to actually begin to face the weight of shame, to face
Mm.
how much I disliked myself. You know, one of the memories I have from freshman year of college is I'd go play basketball, pick up basketball in the gym, and I'd play really poorly, or poorly for what I considered poor play. And I'd go back to the room and I'd look myself in the mirror and I'd say, I effing hate you. I
Wow.
hate you. And I'd say that out loud to myself because I'd be so angry with how I didn't perform in that moment, that this thing would just come out of me. And it was almost like surprise, but like, where did that, like, I don't think I do. But it was
Yeah.
like this vitriol towards myself that was starting to emerge at that point in my life when I started to get independence and I started to use it to spiral out of control.
And what's crazy is that it wasn't the basketball that you were upset of your performance, right? It was all
Right.
the other stuff that's just trying to come out, and just like it's the shame and the guilt and all of it's just like, this is who I really hate. Dude, I remember having those moments too of just like, who the heck am I? I remember manipulating women. I remember when I hit my rock bottom, I was 16. I almost committed suicide, and I was just like, I hate this life and I hate myself for this,
Yeah.
and just wanting to be done.
Yeah.
And I remember God just had to break me, and it sounds like you started to have that breaking moment. And it's funny because dude, we didn't talk about this, but like similarly, I remember saying, "Lord, I need you," and then a month later, or like a week later, I'm falling
Yeah.
back into the things, and I'm going
Yeah.
back and forth. I'm like, "God, I need you." I didn't know
No,
how.
like, I'm
Right?
serious. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like I'm serious.
No,
So
I had to be, yeah, I had, I had nothing. I had nothing to offer. I had nothing to give. I was done performing. I had nothing at that point. And it was that's why I said earlier, by the grace, he started to bring guys into my life who had started to do the work, who could be like, hey,
Yeah.
come over here. And they didn't know any of that stuff.
Yeah.
Actually, a lot of the guys that started to minister with guys who have very similar stories. And it was just by coincidence or God's act in bringing them into my life that allowed me to start experiencing you're not alone.
Yeah.
We've been there
100%,
before.
man.
We've done that too. We know what that feels which that felt like I told you on our call earlier, that felt like the 10,000 pound gorilla coming off my back.
Yeah. So then what was the stuff that they started walking you through that you started to find healing and you're like, oh my gosh, I can see one, hope, and two, transformation?
Yeah. So some of those earliest relationships introduced me to a book in a small group process called Dangerous Men, written by Lowell Seashore, who's here local in Minnesota, but is a ministry that's extended across the world, but often on college campuses. And it was a small group that the first chapter is about identity, and the second week you share your story with what he calls lustimonies, sharing your story with sexual sin. It's the first time I'd ever looked anybody else in the face and said anything about that. I think I remember having one time in high school, I like asked two buddies of mine if looking at porn and jerking off was a sin. I think I asked them that, and they were like, "Yeah, you should confess that." And then I never brought it up again. That was the only
Yeah.
time that I'd ever had a conversation in my life, even though this was the predominant experience or lens that I looked at life through. Never had one conversation about it. And that time I shared 60% of my story because everybody else seemed like they were sharing 100% of theirs. So I shared what I could access at that point or what I was willing to get out. And I walked out of that room feeling like the 10,000 pound gorilla was off my back. I was like, holy cow, that was amazing. And those dudes from that moment became brothers. They saw me, they accepted me, they were me in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And they weren't repulsed. Not that I thought they were going to be, but I didn't know I had no context for what that would be like for me. And so really it was like a kind of exposure therapy to have to face that racing heartbeat. Holy cow, am I about to do this experience? And then to get through it and like body, brain, spirit, like, oh my gosh, like that's what I needed. And so from that moment, there were 6 other weeks where we walked through different stuff about sexuality and the way that God sees our sexuality versus the way that it's been taught to us by the world, and then goes into spiritual warfare and how to actually take authority back of your life and how to fight as a man. And then you go on this Steps to Freedom retreat where you do basically a life inventory confession. And I went through 80% of my life then and like felt way more free. And for 3 months after that, I was like completely off the sauce. I was like, I felt like a free man, didn't think once about porn, didn't even, maybe I'm over exaggerating now because it's been so long, but I honestly don't think I had one temptation in that 3 months. I just felt so free, so locked in, like new life. This is amazing. Like, this is what I've been after. And then it came back into the picture. And from then forward, for about another 13 years, it was this 1 to 3 week cycle of trying to get free, going back to it as this thing that I reflexively needed. And I struggled with that for a long time until a couple of years ago.
Yeah. It's fascinating that moment where you're like, I felt like I wasn't sinning for 3 months, right? Where you're just like, everything was great. And I love how God does this, right? Because sometimes we feel like our freedom is going to be this 100% moment, right? Where everything is going to be gone. But you're like, no,
Conversion
first it was
moment, baby.
60%.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
then you were
Yeah.
like, first 60%, then 80%. Then after a couple years later, now you're like, okay, I'm fully there. Now I've given everything. I'm fully known. I think that's just the process of salvation and sanctification, right? Of you slowly giving little by little, and all of a sudden, God's like, "Hey, I'm going to work with whatever you give me." He's not condemning us. He's like, "I'm proud of you. I know this is as much as you can go right now, but that's
Yeah.
okay." And then once you feel that freedom, you're going to have the empowerment to keep sharing the other stuff. So you went through this whole process. Talk to me about, like, fast forward now to today, right? You've been off the sauce for several years now, right? You are helping men. What's kind of like your framework, or what are the ways that you're helping men overcome just the sin and the shame of
Yeah.
lust and pornography?
Yeah. It's what I discovered that finally set me free. And at the core of it is the difference between craving and temptation and the way that it
Yeah.
manifests in the brain. You can think about it like addiction versus like being tempted to look at a girl or something. Like I didn't realize that my brain had been hijacked and wired to need this stuff when I experienced tension, discomfort, pain in my life because I had done that my whole life. And I think many men don't think they are. I think they just feel like they're undisciplined, or they're not trying hard enough, or they're not praying hard enough, or they haven't prayed the right prayer. And that's how I felt for a very long time
Yeah.
until I realized that this fight or flight center of my brain was the thing that was being activated. And when your fight or flight center of your brain is being activated, you react, not act. So I was no longer making a conscious decision or choice to use or to not use. I was reacting to whatever would keep me safe. And what felt like would keep me safe is using this thing to alleviate the tension that I was carrying. And I had never learned and allowed my brain and body to learn how to work that stuff out. So I learned about the neuroscience of craving and I got super excited about it. And I deployed a new process in my life that was relatively simple that required activating my appraisal cortex or my thinking brain through reframing, learning to practice being present, to slow down. I used a lot of breath work techniques to be able to slow myself down and calm down when I'd start to get activated, which was such a common multiple times a day, many times a day when I first started that I didn't even realize. And then I started to work with another guy, calling him every single day, like not being accountable of like, have you fallen today, but what are you carrying today? Because we know that porn isn't the problem. Porn is the solution to the problem. It's the thing that I need to solve my problems, my stuff for me when I go to it. And it's not even primarily for most of us a matter of sexual arousal. The fact is that sexual arousal has overtaken that more deep, true experience and just allowed us to have a cheap alternative to go to alleviate it without having to do the deep interior work of how am I actually doing? What am I carrying? Where am I carrying it? What does that feel like? And then learning how to be able to work that stuff out of you. And so, really, how I experienced it was a holistic approach: body, mind, and spirit, taking all of who God created me to be into consideration. And within 3 months, that 1 to 3 week cycle that I had been trying to work myself out of for over 13 years, I went from that 1 to 3 week cycle. I fell once, used porn once within that 3 month period. And then from that time forward, that was a couple of Novembers ago. I think two Novembers, 3 Novembers. I'm losing track now. I think 2 Novembers ago. I haven't experienced a single craving to pornography since then. And it was the
Wow.
most amazing
Amazing. Praise God.
edification for me of rewiring is actually possible. What we've all heard about neuroplasticity and your brain's ability to rewire, your brain can become unaddicted. It takes work. It takes conscious effort. It takes intentionality, but I don't have to manage an addiction for the rest of my life. If you had told me that a month before I started to do the work, I would have told you we were full of crap because I would have just been like, you don't know me. You don't know what I've walked through. You don't know my whole story. But the reality is it's so true. And that's what we do in the Freedom Group now. That's what my heart burns for, is to be able to introduce those guys to other men to that same experience of knowing what craving is, being able to visualize it when it happens, and then to deploy the couple tools that I just shared and many others. So when they're living real life, they can uncouple sexual arousal from the stuff that they're carrying, confront the stuff and learn to welcome it rather than to fight or flee from it. And then see pain as the path and discomfort as your teacher. And as I've shared with you, that was 2 years ago. My son now has cancer. For the past couple of months, we've been dealing with getting him the treatment that he needs. It's the toughest thing I've ever faced. I tell people all the time, if this had happened to me 2 years ago, I would have been flattened. I would
Yeah.
have needed porn multiple times a day again because of how much pain this has been. But because God, by the grace of God, my life has been reordered to actually not just see like because I think positively, see pain as the path or discomfort as my teacher, but to actually experience it. Pain, good for me. Suffering, an invitation, trial, tribulation, as an invitation to be fashioned into the man God wants me to be, rather than an aversion of something to be able to just figure out how to get more comfortable in life. through food, porn, alcohol, anger being the four things that we most times experience when we get this limbic activation that we go to for the alleviation we're after, that I don't have to go to those things anymore. And that's completely changed my life. And so that's what the work that we do in the Freedom Group is trying to replicate that. We lead small group cohorts of guys that are doing that work, that are serious about it. We're serious about it, serious enough that I think we're the only people in the marketplace right now that put a guarantee behind what we do. And we say, if we're going to get you free from the craving to porn in a year or less, we'll work with you completely free until you are. Because we believe that the science supports that God tells us that we're supposed to be free for freedom's sake, and that science supports that that is a between 3 and 12-month process that your brain needs
Yeah.
to actually rewire. And again, I think so many of us have heard, hey, you can rewire your brain. And my mission and my heart is to show guys actually how to do it.
Yeah, 100%, man. Because the reality is, most people don't see it, right? And then for some people who are listening to this, they're like, "Can you really rewire your brain?" Well, Romans 12 talks about this. Like it says, "Therefore, offer yourself as a living sacrifice with the renewing of your mind." Right? Like that
Yeah,
renewing of your mind. I love when the science,
yeah,
matches with the Bible.
just
Like
backing
it
up what
finally
we know
caught
for a
up.
long time. Yeah.
Yeah, we've known for a long time, and it's just like, oh, we can do this. And I love how you were just talking about that. Like we can. It's possible. Let's make the effort. And for those who are listening, I know, Joe, I know you well enough that you're not saying, hey, we're going to do this on our own. Like it's our own effort. It's God working through us. It's the grace of
Mm-hmm.
God empowering us. And one of the things that I always used to do is when I did my breath work and just slow my life down, I would just say, Lord, how are you redeeming this moment?
Yeah.
Like in this season of life right now, what are you trying to do? What's going on? Why am I acting like, cause sometimes I can't see my blind spots, but I love how Psalms 36:4 says, in the light, you shall see light. Like when you are in presence, he's just going to reveal things. And I would just be like, God, reveal to me, why am I craving this thing so much? And even today, right? Fast forward,
Mm-hmm.
I've been free for 15 plus years now,
Let's
but
go.
whenever there's like that lustful desires or like the sinful flesh kind of starts to kick in, I ask myself, like, God, what's going on? And I'm like, oh, I really just feel lonely or I'm really
Yeah.
stressed. So my fantasy life or these things that I want to attach to, I could just say, God, I don't need that. I need you. And I come to you and I separate and I'm like, oh, thank you, God, and I move forward. But Joe, as we wrap up here, what's one quick in like 30 seconds, if there was a encouragement you could give to men who are like, I hear you, Joe. I know I need help. I want to, but I just don't know where to start. What's a good first step that they could do in a few seconds?
My number one advice, because it's over and over again, the guys that we're coaching say is the most practical and transformative habit that they've deployed in their life by running our process, is to start working with another guy every single day. You call each other every single day, 5-10 minutes a day. And all you're trying to answer is, where am I experiencing discomfort today? You're not talking about sexuality. You're not talking about, have I fallen? Have I not fallen? You're not trying to give each other a therapy session. You're simply trying to answer the question, where have I been uncomfortable today? And
Hmm.
that exercise of self-awareness will expose the stuff in you faster than you can imagine, and create connection with yourself that you didn't know was possible. And is going to, like you said, I think breath is one of the best ways to develop a deep prayer life. This isn't detached from God. This is tapping into the way that God wired us, the way that He made us, to use the tools that He's given us, our body, our brain, our spirit, to be able to bring ourselves back to Him, to experience restoration in Him, because He first loved us. And so that's where I would start. And that's where I tell any guy who's saying either the coaching process isn't right for me, or just what you just said, what's the one thing you would tell me to do? 3 months at least, persist every single day, 5 to 10 minutes a day, talk to somebody. A lot of times guys in our process do voice memos back and forth. You don't
Yeah.
even need an immediate sounding board. I just need to get my stuff out verbally in front of me, and then notice where I'm carrying it. It feels like tension in my chest, like a bowling ball in my stomach, like weight on my shoulders. It feels like I had this massive hard neck a couple of days ago that was like a 9 out of 10 painful. And I did 5 minutes of breathing and then recall, just processed real briefly what it was like to hold that. And it was the one. 3 years ago would have been all I needed to be able to need to release sexually. But it took me 3 minutes, 4 minutes to be able to do the work, to be able to get it out of me in a way that was actually deeply healing, restorative for me, and took me back to level-headed, ground zero, not fight or flight, just deep rest and digest state of being. So do it, because it might
I
just
love it,
change your
man.
life.
I'm assuming when you tell them, hey, do the audio note or whenever, it's in the moment where are they doing it when they're most stressed out, or it could be any time of the day?
Doesn't matter. Any time of day. I
Doesn't
would
matter.
do it at 4 p.m. most days. I would either do it at the beginning of my day, like talking about yesterday, or I'd do it at 4 p.m. on my drive home from work. And it was just
Nice.
trying to process or articulate real briefly, like, what did I experience today? And that's where I started. Maybe most guys that are listening is like, I already know what I go through on a daily basis. I feel it very well. I don't think that's true, because I don't think that's true of the vast majority of men. But me articulating it was the first time oftentimes I noticed that it existed. I noticed
Yeah.
that it was there. So it was bringing into my awareness what I actually was. And that's what I meant by earlier saying it'll draw such deep self-awareness in you. For me, that's what it did. And I've seen so many other guys in our coaching program benefit from that, because they start to see themselves clearly in a way that they never knew existed. Even though, and they were like, oh my gosh, I've felt this way for 10 years. I've always felt this way, but I never even noticed it, which is a crazy dichotomy, that you could always be experiencing something and never be aware of it. But this process is the tool necessary to be able to actually grow in practical self-awareness.
Sweet, man. I love it. Joe, for those who are like, I want to know more about what you do, I want to follow you a little bit more and just gain more trust and maybe even work with you, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, you can go to our social media, the Freedom Group, pretty much anywhere, or Freedom Coach _ Joe on most platforms. I guess Instagram and Facebook are the ones I use most frequently. And then the freedomgroup.co is our website. You can find our intensive that's coming up in March that we're doing to capture all of this stuff in a real succinct, deep way over the course of 5 days in Estes Park, Colorado. We got a couple of adventure wilderness excursions next year. We're only going to be taking 4 or 5 guys out on with another coach that works with our team. And then there's a link on the website to schedule a discovery call with me, free 30-minute discovery session. I'd love to get to know you and your story. It sends you straight to my calendar, or you can pick a time that works for you to chat. I'd love to chat with you.
I love it. Joe, thank you so much for sharing your story and using your story to bring redemption for others and that God would be glorified, man. I love it. So thank you, thank you, thank you again. For those of you who are like, oh, I didn't get all those website links, don't worry. It's going to be in the show notes. So go check out Joe. Again, thank you, Joe, so much. And for those of you who keep listening, I say this every single time, but remember, you're not alone. And as men, okay, the purpose of this podcast is to help you kill shame, stand strong, and be on mission. Until next time, hope you guys have a great day and God bless. Thanks for joining us today. If you found this episode helpful, make sure to subscribe and leave a review. Remember, killing shame isn't just about breaking free from the past. It's about walking boldly into the future God has for you.